Welcome to the Purple Nation podcast. A podcast reminding us that we live in a diverse nation diverse in faith, diverse in culture, diverse in politics, and diverse in thought. Though we are a diverse nation, we are one nation, not a red nation, not a blue nation, but a purple nation.
Hello, my fellow citizens of the Purple Nation. This week, we are going to talk about collectivism versus individuality. And we're going to talk about this because this is one of those major points of division between those who tend to lean more right and those who tend to lean more left. And if we're honest about it, what we have to admit is that there are advantages and disadvantages to both. Now, as someone who is more right-leaning, I can tend to have an individualistic bent, but also as one who is a Christian and one who is a pastor, I understand the importance of the collective, of the community, because the faith in which I am a part of, the faith in which I believe in, is a faith that is based on community. And so I understand the importance of both the collective, the community, and the individual. And so what I want to do today, as a part of bringing the Purple Nation together once again, is I want to talk about the positives and negatives of the collective, the community. I want to talk about the positives and the negatives of the individuality, and talk about how we need to attempt to strike a balance between the two. I had a friend of mine once who said to me that the community must always come before the individual. Now, I disagree with that because, as I'm going to show you later, that can be dangerous. I think that can be a dangerous way of thinking, and especially anytime you put always in a sentence. Then on the other hand of it, there will be those that will say that it's totally about the individual. And no, that is extremely dangerous as well. Now, I'm a big Star Trek fan, okay? And I have two favorite characters in Star Trek, and especially when talking about the original series here. And those were Scotty and Mr. Spock. Now, for those of you who follow Star Trek, even those who may not follow Star Trek, you will know that Mr. Spock is a Vulcan. And one of the sayings that he coined in the original series was the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And that is a very collectivist, a very communal way of thinking. And so what I want to do is I want to start by talking about collectivism, talking about the community and those positives and negatives. And then I'll talk about individuality. And finally, where can we strike that balance? So often we'll talk about our founding fathers and what were the intentions of our founding fathers. And our founding fathers intended for there to be community. They also intended to protect the rights of the individual. The first thing that we have to admit is that there can be no government, there can be no establishment of people coming together and working together without community. That's what community is. From the time that humans came together in tribes, and what did they do? They shared resources, they shared labor, they protected each other and from other tribes, and that was community. And in many cases, the community, in order to survive, the community had to come first. In order to survive, the individual had to yield to the community. And that's been the case for thousands of years. Well, now we're in more modern times, and there does have to be some respect for the individual. But if you are that individualistic like person, what you have to admit is that the life and the lifestyle and the ability to live in the way that you live would not exist were it not for people coming together, for people working together. And it is that working together which allows for us to live the life that we live. And the founding fathers, they understood this. Let's go to our Constitution. And the very first words of our Constitution are the preamble. And it starts out with a very community-oriented statement. We, not me, not I, but we the people of the United States, that we the collective states of America, we the states who have come together, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. Now let's stop there. We're going to get back to establish justice, but we're going to get back to establish justice when we talk about the individual. But ensure domestic tranquility. In order to have domestic tranquility, you have got to have people who come together who agree to a certain set of rules. And they agree to live by those certain set of rules. And when you have certain individuals that step outside of that agreement, then there are consequences for that. That's the reason that we have laws. That's the reason that we have law enforcement, is that we as a society have agreed to a certain types of rules, a certain way of living, a community, and people either choose to live within that community or they buck against it and try to live outside of it. Domestic tranquility is not possible without community. So we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense. That is the reason that we have a military. That is the reason that we have law enforcement. That is the reason that we have these big organizations, is because we have come together as a community to provide for a common defense. It is not every man for himself, every individual for themselves. We have a common defense, and we need a common defense because what we can do together is much more powerful and much stronger than what we could do as individuals, especially when it came to facing a foreign power. So in order to provide that common defense, we have to have community. Promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity. We do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So you see, it could be argued that the founders, in their infinite wisdom, understood the need for community. They understood the need for us to come together to be a collective. There are benefits to this. However, it is also important for us to understand that if we take it too far, then it becomes oppressive. Now, let me say that again. If we take collectivism, if we take community too far, it becomes oppressive. Community is about everyone together. It is also about the majority. And let me tell you, as a minority, I understand that the majority is not always right, And the majority sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally ignores the rights, ignores the wants, ignores the needs of the minority. One day I might do a separate podcast on the Electoral College, but I am one of those who is in favor of the Electoral College. I am not against making some tweaks and some changes here, but I don't necessarily want a direct popular vote election of the president, because once again, majorities can sometimes become tyrannical. Community can sometimes become tyrannical and oppress the minorities, oppress those who might be on the margins. And we want to be aware of that. Um, even when community has good intentions, which often community does, uh, if it gets out of hand, it gets to the point where it becomes oppressive, it becomes tyrannical, it becomes smothering. You need a certain degree of rules, you need a certain degree of order, you need a certain degree of structure within community. But we also have to allow for a degree of individuality, for people to be who they are outside of the community. So let's talk about, since I brought up individuality, let's talk about the pluses and the minuses of individuality. Now, we in America, we pride ourselves on a rugged individualism, a pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Now, there is a lot to be said for allowing people to live their lives in the way that they choose to live their lives, especially when the living of that life is not having a major detrimental effect on other people. And when we look at our founding fathers, just as much as they understood community, they also understood the rights of the individual. When we talk about justice, justice is often viewed through the lens of whether you tend to be more of a collective type person or more of an individual. But when the founding fathers looked at justice, they understood that when we talk about justice, it's not only justice for the community. You do have to have justice. You do have to have a way to protect the rights of the individual. And we see that within our Constitution. When you look at the Bill of Rights, when you look at those first 10 amendments, many of them are addressing rights of the individual, the right of the individual to assemble, the right of the individual to worship as they see fit, the right of the individual to be able to speak as they wish to speak, the right of the individual to protect themselves, the right of the individual to not have to quarter soldiers, the right of the individual to not have to deal with unlawful searches and seizures, the right of the individual not to be enslaved or imprisoned unlawfully. So when we look at the founding fathers who understood collective, understood the importance of community, they also understood and wanted to protect the right of the individual. Now, when we run into problems is what happens when one individual right intersects with and seems to override the individual right of another. And that's when we have issues. Who's right? Who has the greater right? Is it which individual has the greater right? And that's when we have to look to society. We have to look to community to be able to interpret. I did a podcast a few weeks ago on Kyle Rittenhouse, and Uh, when we look at individual rights, all of us have a right to live. We all have a right to live. You have a right to live. I have a right to live. And if one person is attempting to take away that life, and another person, in the defense of their own life, takes a life, well, you could honestly say that one individual infringed on the rights of another by taking their life. That's a fact. They did. But we live in a society that says that you have the right to defend yourself. The big issue with individual rights and what makes individualism difficult is that big question of what happens when two different sets of individual rights clash with each other. Who gets what they want? And the fact is that we also have to understand with individual rights, no man is an island. We talk about pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps. But the bottom line is, none of you within the sound of my voice, no human being ever has been successful totally on their own without some form of help. Somewhere along the way, those who are successful had someone who gave them a hand, someone who picked them up when they stumbled. Now, the power of individualism is that it teaches a person not to be looking for a handout, but even when one is being helped, to work for it, to at least try to earn it. And I truly do believe, my friends, my fellow Purple Nation citizens, I truly do believe that that is a way to live, not to look for a handout. Maybe a hand up, but not to look for a handout, not to look for an entitlement, not to feel that you're entitled to something, but to have the desire and to, if you have the ability, to work towards it. I believe, for me, that is the power of individualism. Where it goes too far is when a person is so individualistic that they cannot see how what they are doing may be harming the greater community. So where do we find a balance? A big argument now is between the 2A community and those who want more gun control. And as someone who has lived in both an urban environment and a rural environment, I honestly see the arguments of both sides. But I also, once again, I'm a constitutionalist, and so there is this pesky Second Amendment. So what can we do though? How can those who have the more communal view, and it would probably tend to be more gun control advocates, and those who have the more individualistic view, although I would argue that being a 2A advocate is also a communal way of thinking as well. But a lot of 2A people do tend to be individualistic. They tend to talk about defense of self and defense of family, although, again, it can be used for defense of community as well. How do we bridge that gap? And not just in the issue of the Second Amendment, but in a myriad of issues. Well, what we have to do is we have to understand that, once again, society doesn't exist without community. Society does not exist without the collective. We have to be a community in order to come together, or else we're going to have anarchy. And what we have to say, though, is that we, as a community, cannot be so strict, so stringent, that we smother the ability for people to be individuals within the community. Okay, that's the importance. We have to allow for people to be individuals within the community. And that means that sometimes there are going to be disagreements, sometimes there are going to be differences. But the reason why I say that the community is not always central. The reason why I disagree with my friend who said that the community must always come before the individual is, if the community is doing something that is harmful to the individual, then the individual needs to have the ability to stop that harm. I'll give you, I'm gonna just lay a lot of cards on the table today. So I am a proponent of school vouchers. Okay, I am one who supports the voucher system, and here's the reason why. The argument that is often used is that in order to have good, sound public schools, you have to have the resources. And in order to have the resources, you can't have a voucher system because you need to have the students' bodies in those schools in order for those schools to receive the funding. Okay. But the problem with that is that what happens when you have a situation where you have a school that is failing? And a school that is not just failing 1 year or 2 years, but a school that is perpetually failing. Now the community view would say, okay, but you have to additional funding, just turn the school around. But and that might work, but in the process of turning that school around, you have 3, 4, 5 years of a failing school that individuals had no choice but to go to. But if they had a voucher, they could make an individual choice. And this is where the individual comes in, to be able to take their child out of that failing school and put them in a school that's not failing. And maybe what you do as a community is you do provide additional funding if that's what's needed, because it's not always about money. But you try and figure out why this school is failing. And sometimes it might just be you got to close the school and send everybody someplace else. But that's an instance that is an example where what the community is doing is hurting the individual. And I don't believe that the individual should be hurt like that, because the individual making a decision that is best for them does not harm the community. It doesn't, in my opinion. So we do need community, but community has to make sure that they are not holding the reins so tight that they snuff out individualism, because what will happen is people will fight against that. We have to maintain a delicate balance. We need community, but we also have to allow people to be individuals. And if we can find that delicate balance, then we're just a little bit closer to being that one nation, not a red nation, not a blue nation, but a purple nation.